My brother cut me off for 9 years, called me trash, and said I'd never amount to anything. Then I became a CEO and bought an oceanfront villa. Stay with me while I tell you how it all happened, and if this story moves you, don't forget to share it with someone who needs hope today. My name is Nia, and I grew up in what most people would call a normal middle-class family. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. My parents worked hard, and I thought family meant sticking together no matter what. But I had an older brother, Charles, who never once looked at me like I was his equal. From the time I was a little girl, he called me names: worthless, lazy, a burden. I used to brush it off, thinking it was just sibling teasing, but as I grew older, the words sank deeper, like stones I couldn't put down. Charles was always the golden child. He had good grades, he was sharp, confident, and everyone in the family admired him. I, on the other hand, was quieter. I dreamed of being independent, of starting something of my own, but to him, that was ridiculous. Whenever I talked about my hopes, Charles would laugh. You're never going to make it. Stop pretending you're special. His voice was sharp, full of certainty, and sometimes I believed him more than I believed myself. The breaking point came one evening during a family gathering. We were sitting around the dining table, the air heavy with laughter and small talk, when the conversation turned to the future. I nervously said I wanted to build a business one day, something that mattered to people. Instead of encouragement, Charles smirked and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Nia, stop embarrassing yourself. You'll always be trash. You can't even take care of yourself. How could you ever run anything?" The room went silent. My cheeks burned as everyone stared. My mother's eyes dropped to her plate, and nobody defended me. The humiliation felt unbearable. But Charles wasn't finished. He pushed back his chair, looked straight at me, and said, "From today, don't come to me for anything. You're nothing to me. Trash belongs where it belongs, far away." It was like a knife twisting into my chest. 9 years ago, in that moment, my brother cut me off completely. I walked out of that house with tears streaming down my face, feeling like my own family had closed the door on me. I didn't have money, I didn't have anyone to lean on, and I carried only the echo of his cruel words. But deep inside, something else was born that night. The heartbreak hurt, but it also lit a fire. I promised myself I would never again let Charles decide who I was. He had taken away my dignity in front of everyone, but I swore one day I'd take back my worth, with or without my family by my side. After Charles cut me off, I felt like the world had turned its back on me. I had no savings, no support, and no idea what tomorrow would look like. The only thing I carried with me were his cruel words echoing in my head. "You'll never amount to anything. You're trash." Those words stung, but they also gave me a strange kind of strength. If I was going to survive, I had to prove him wrong, not just to him, but to myself. I took whatever work I could find. During the day, I worked at a small retail store, folding clothes, smiling at customers, and standing on my feet for hours. At night, I rushed to a diner on the edge of town, waitressing tables until midnight. My hands were always sore, my body exhausted, and sometimes I went home with just enough money to cover rent and cheap groceries. I lived in a tiny one-room apartment with peeling paint and a leaky ceiling, but I told myself it was better than begging anyone for help. Every shift, I remembered Charles's smirk, his voice dripping with pride as he cut me down. Those memories kept me going when my legs shook from tiredness or when I wanted to quit. I would replay those words and whisper back to myself, "One day, I'll show you who I really am." At the diner, I met Emma, a cheerful coworker who had a laugh that could brighten even the gloomiest nights. She noticed I always looked worn out but determined, and little by little, she became my first real friend. On our breaks, she would sit with me in the back, sipping her coffee, and ask about my life. When I told her the truth, that my own brother had abandoned me, her face softened. "That's cruel," she said. "But Nia, you're tougher than you think." Emma was different from anyone I had known. Instead of tearing me down, she lifted me up. She kept nudging me about school. "You've got ideas, you talk about dreams all the time. Why not study business? You're already working harder than most people I know." At first, I laughed it off. I didn't think someone like me could go back to school, not when I was barely surviving. But Emma kept insisting, planting seeds I couldn't ignore. Late at night, after long shifts, I started secretly looking at community college programs. My old laptop lagged and the Wi-Fi in my building barely worked, but I pushed through. I filled out applications with trembling hands, afraid of rejection yet fueled by hope. I didn't tell anyone, not even Emma at first, because it felt too fragile, like a dream that could break if spoken out loud. I was tired, broke, and alone, but I was moving. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was quietly building a path forward, step by step, determined to rewrite the story Charles had written. When I got the acceptance email from the community college's business program, I sat staring at the screen for nearly 10 minutes, afraid it wasn't real. My hands were shaking as I read the words over and over. I had actually gotten in. For the first time since Charles abandoned me, I felt like maybe the world hadn't completely shut me out. But the reality of juggling everything hit hard. My mornings began with classes, afternoons at the retail store, and evenings at the diner. By the time I got home, my eyes burned with exhaustion. I would collapse on the mattress in my tiny apartment, only to set an alarm for a few hours later and start all over again. Sleep became a luxury, and sometimes I wondered if I was destroying myself just to prove a point. Even the people around me weren't sure I could keep it up. A few professors eyed me skeptically when I turned in late assignments or looked too tired to answer questions in class. One even said, "Nia, you've got too much on your plate. Maybe slow down before you burn out." Their words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they sounded so close to what Charles used to say. Doubt was everywhere, even from people who weren't trying to hurt me. Surprisingly, even Emma worried about me. One night after our shift at the diner, she pulled me aside. "Nia, I know you're strong, but you're working yourself into the ground. What if you can't do both, school and work?" I knew she meant well, but it cut deep. For a moment, I thought about quitting, about choosing survival over dream. But then I reminded myself why I had started this journey in the first place. Quitting would only make Charles right, and I couldn't let that happen. The turning point came during one of my business classes. The professor announced we had to pitch a small business idea, something we believed in. My classmates groaned, but I felt a nervous excitement building inside me. All those long nights thinking about how I wanted to build something meaningful came rushing back. When it was my turn, I stood in front of the class with sweaty palms and a trembling voice. I told them about a wellness product line I had been sketching out, natural, affordable skincare made for people like me, who didn't have much but still wanted to feel good about themselves. As I spoke, something shifted. The fear in my chest loosened, and I started to believe my own words. For the first time, I saw a flicker of interest in the professor's eyes. A few students nodded, and one even asked a question afterward. Walking back to my seat, I felt a rush of energy I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just a class project, it was a spark of hope. And deep down, I knew this could be the beginning of something real. I hadn't seen much of my family since Charles cut me off, but every now and then, I forced myself to show up at gatherings. A part of me still craved acceptance, especially from my mother, Linda. I thought maybe if she saw how hard I was working, she'd understand. I wasn't expecting applause, but I hoped for at least a kind word. The gathering was at my aunt's house, a birthday celebration crowded with relatives. The smell of food filled the air, and laughter echoed from every corner. I walked in nervously, clutching a small gift bag I had bought with my tips from the diner. For a few minutes, things seemed fine. My cousins greeted me warmly, and I let myself relax. But then Charles arrived. He was dressed in a crisp suit, expensive watch gleaming on his wrist, his usual smirk plastered on his face. He always knew how to command attention, and the room seemed to tilt toward him. I tried to stay quiet, avoiding his gaze, but of course he noticed me. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Look who showed up, the broke student. Still waiting tables, Nia? Or have you finally figured out that dreams don't pay bills?" His words sliced through me like glass. Laughter broke out from a couple of relatives who always sided with him. My face burned, and I wished the floor would swallow me. I turned to my mother, hoping she would step in, maybe tell him to stop. Instead, she sighed and shook her head. "Charles is right, Nia. He's responsible. He's building a future. You, on the other hand, you've always been a dreamer." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was dismissive, final, as if I were a child who refused to grow up. Her words hurt worse than Charles's mockery. Hearing my own mother side with him, dismissing all the sleepless nights, the 2 jobs, the studying, it broke something inside me. I felt small, invisible, like nothing I did would ever be enough for them. The room blurred with tears, and before anyone could see me break down, I rushed outside. The cool night air hit my face, but it didn't cool the fire in my chest. I stood on the porch, crying silently, my gift bag crumpled in my hand. For a moment, I thought about going back inside, swallowing my pride, pretending it didn't hurt. But then another thought came, stronger than the pain. I realized I didn't need them. Not Charles, not even my mother. I had been fighting alone for so long, and maybe that was how it was meant to be. Standing there under the stars, I made a vow to myself. I would never again beg them for approval, money, or support. If I rose, it would be on my own strength. That night, I walked away not just from the party but from the hope that my family would save me. From then on, I would save myself. I still remember the night I clicked the launch button on my little online store. My heart was pounding as if I were opening the doors to a real shop on Main Street. It wasn't much, just a simple website selling a few handmade skincare products I had spent months perfecting in my tiny kitchen. Natural oils, simple ingredients, affordable prices. I believed in it because I had made it for people like me, people who wanted to feel good without breaking the bank. At first, I thought orders would start rolling in. I kept refreshing the page every 10 minutes, waiting for that little notification. But the hours passed, then days, and nothing came. When my first order finally did arrive, it felt like winning the lottery. I carefully packaged it, wrote a thank you note, and sent it off with a smile. But that joy didn't last. A week later, the customer left a bad review. Didn't work. Cheap quality. Wouldn't recommend. My stomach sank as I read it. It wasn't just one review. A couple more trickled in, each one more discouraging. My sales were almost non-existent, and the few that came often ended in disappointment. Money was tight, tighter than ever. I had used nearly every dollar I saved from tips and wages to buy ingredients, packaging, and that website. Now I was staring at my bank account, wondering if I had just wasted it all. During one of my lowest nights, I sat at the diner after closing, my head resting on the table. Emma slid into the booth across from me. "Rough day?" she asked gently. I nodded, fighting back tears. "Maybe Charles was right," I whispered. "Maybe I'm just chasing a dream that's never going to work." Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "No, don't you dare say that. You started this because you wanted to build something for yourself, something real. Remember that. One bad week doesn't erase your vision. Keep going, Nia." Her words gave me enough strength to push forward. I tweaked my formulas, improved my packaging, and worked late into the night adjusting my website. I posted on social media whenever I had a free minute, though most of the time it felt like shouting into a void. But then, something unexpected happened. A small lifestyle influencer with a modest following stumbled upon my products. She ordered them herself, and a few days later, she posted a glowing review on her Instagram story. She raved about how gentle the skincare was, how affordable, how it made her feel pampered. Almost instantly, I saw a ripple effect. My notifications lit up. A few new orders appeared, then a few more. They weren't huge numbers, but compared to before, it was a miracle. I reinvested every penny. Every sale went back into buying more supplies, improving the formulas, and shipping faster. I barely slept, my days a blur of packing boxes, answering emails, and clocking into my shifts. But for the first time, I felt momentum. It wasn't success yet, but it was proof. My dream wasn't impossible. It was just beginning. The orders that had once trickled in slowly began to turn into a steady stream. What started as a few boxes in my tiny apartment soon grew into piles of packages stacked against the walls. Local shops began reaching out, curious about my products after hearing customers talk about them. I remember the first time a small boutique downtown agreed to carry my line. I stood outside the store for nearly an hour, staring through the window as my jars sat proudly on a shelf. For once, I felt like I belonged in the world of business, not just as a dreamer, but as someone building something real. Still, the road wasn't easy. Every new step came with rejection. I walked into countless stores with samples, only to hear no, thank you again and again. Some owners said my brand looked too homemade. Others claimed customers wouldn't trust someone like me with skincare. Every dismissal stung, but I refused to stop trying. I went home, cried into my pillow, then woke up the next day ready to push again. The turning point came when I met David. He was a seasoned investor who had seen hundreds of pitches in his career. A friend of Emma's mentioned my products at a networking event, and somehow, my samples ended up in his hand. When he reached out to meet me, I almost thought it was a scam. But when I sat across from him in a quiet cafe, I realized he was the real deal. He asked about my journey, my vision, and my struggles. For the first time, someone with power looked at me not as a lost cause, but as potential. "I believe in you, Nia," he said, after listening to me pour out my story. "You've built something from nothing. That kind of grit, you can't teach it. With the right support, you can scale this far beyond where you are now." His words lit a fire inside me. David became my first major investor, giving me the resources to expand production beyond my small kitchen setup. He also became a mentor, teaching me how to manage finances, negotiate deals, and plan long-term strategy. Under his guidance, I learned lessons no classroom could ever give me. But growth came with a price. I spent nights hunched over my desk, answering emails until my vision blurred. I traveled to meet suppliers, only to be told no more times than I could count. There were days I thought about quitting, when tears blurred my notebooks, and exhaustion weighed heavier than any dream. But every tiny success, a positive review, a repeat customer, a store reordering stock, kept me moving forward. Slowly but surely, the numbers started to change. For the first time in my life, I wasn't counting pennies before rent was due. I was making real money, money that gave me choices, money that reminded me I had built this with my own two hands. My brand was no longer a fragile idea. It was becoming a force, and so was I. Years slipped by, each one carrying the weight of long nights, endless work, and countless sacrifices. What began in the corner of my apartment had grown into something I never dared to dream at the start, a full-fledged company with employees, offices, and products sold across the country. I wasn't just running a small brand anymore. I was running a multi-million-dollar wellness empire. The day I signed the papers declaring me CEO of my own corporation, I sat alone in my office, staring at the title. 3 simple letters, CEO. Yet they carried the story of every sleepless night, every rejection, every tear I had swallowed when no one believed in me. My hands trembled as I touched the document, and for a moment, I let myself cry. Not out of weakness, but out of pride. I had made it here without shortcuts, without family support, without the brother who said I was nothing. With my first real taste of success, I decided to buy something for myself. Not just a car or new clothes, but a home that represented how far I had come. That's when I found the Oceanfront villa in Florida. The moment I walked through its tall glass doors, the salty breeze kissed my face, and the sound of waves filled my ears. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a view of endless blue water. It wasn't just a house. It was a declaration. I bought it without hesitation. The villa became my sanctuary, a symbol of victory carved out of pain. On my first night there, I carried a glass of wine out to the balcony and stood watching the waves crash against the shore. The ocean stretched endlessly, strong and untamed, and I felt a connection to it, as if I, too, had been beaten by storms yet remained standing. But even in that moment of triumph, I couldn't silence the memory of Charles's voice. It rang in my head as clearly as the sound of the wave. "You're trash. You'll never amount to anything." Those words, once heavy chains around my heart, echoed now like ghosts. I closed my eyes and let the memory come, not to wound me, but to remind me how far I had risen. Standing there, I whispered to myself, never again. I swore I would never let my brother or anyone else strip away my worth. No matter what happened, I had already proven him wrong. The girl he called worthless had built an empire. The sister he cast aside now stood in a villa he could never dream of affording. The ocean roared as if answering back, a sound of power and freedom. I breathed it in deeply, letting the salt air fill my lungs. For the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. I wasn't the little sister crushed under Charles's shadow anymore. I was Nia, the CEO, the survivor, the woman who turned trash into triumph. And this time, no one could take it away. I had almost forgotten what Charles's voice sounded like until the day it echoed through the gates of my villa. It was early evening, the sun casting gold across the ocean, when the security guard called to let me know a man claiming to be my brother was at the entrance. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Charles, after 9 years of silence and cruelty, why would he come here? When he walked up the stone pathway, I barely recognized him. The sharp suit and confident stride he once flaunted were gone. His face was lined with stress, his hair thinner, his shoulders slumped. Yet, when he spotted me standing at the doorway, he stretched his lips into a forced smile. "Nia," he said, his tone syrupy sweet. "It's been too long. I just wanted to check in on my little sister." My little sister. The words nearly made me laugh. The last time he had called me that, he was spitting the word trash at me in front of our family. But I said nothing. I simply stepped aside and let him in, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and curiosity. Inside, Charles acted as though we were long-lost siblings reunited after a misunderstanding. He complimented the villa, running his hand over the marble counters, peering out at the endless view of the ocean. "Wow, you've really done well for yourself," he said, almost in awe. "I'm proud of you, Nia." The words sounded foreign coming from his mouth, like he had borrowed them from someone else. I stayed quiet, watching him squirm under the weight of his own act. He asked about my business, feigned interest in my life, and even chuckled as though we were sharing some private joke from childhood. But underneath his forced charm, I saw the cracks. His hands trembled when he lifted his glass of water. His eyes darted away when I met them too directly. Finally, the truth slipped out. His voice dropped, and the mask fell. "Listen, Nia, I'll be honest. Things haven't been going so well for me. I made a few bad investments, lost more money than I could afford, and then the company I was working with downsized. I'm out of a job." He let out a shaky laugh, trying to soften it, but his eyes were desperate. I folded my arms, letting him continue. He shifted uncomfortably before finally saying the words I knew were coming. "I was hoping, maybe you could help me out, just until I get back on my feet. Alone, something small, family helping family." Family. The word tasted bitter. He had stripped me of that bond years ago, left me to crawl through life alone while he stood on his pedestal. And now, here he was sitting in my home, pretending to be the brother I had always wished for, just because he needed money. I kept my fury buried behind a calm face, but inside the fire roared. Charles had come crawling back, and this time the power was mine. Charles sat across from me on the velvet couch, still trying to wear that fake smile, but his eyes betrayed him. They were desperate, pleading, already bracing for rejection. For too long, I had kept quiet, swallowing every word, every scar he left on me. But seeing him in my home, after all the years he had called me nothing, something inside me snapped. "Do you even remember what you said to me?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. He blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. 9 years ago, you stood in front of our entire family and called me trash. You said I would never amount to anything. You cut me off, Charles. You told me I was nothing to you. Do you remember that? The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For once, the man who always had a cutting remark stood speechless. I didn't stop. My voice grew stronger with every word. Do you remember the way you smirked while everyone else stayed silent? Do you remember watching me walk out in tears, knowing I had nowhere to go? You humiliated me. You made me feel like I wasn't even worthy of being your sister. Charles shifted uncomfortably, his hands twisting together. Nia, look, I was just tough on you because I wanted you to succeed. You were always dreaming, always chasing things that didn't make sense. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you'd wake up. I laughed bitterly. Tough on me? That wasn't tough love, Charles. That was cruelty. You didn't push me. You abandoned me. You didn't give me strength. You left me to drown. My chest ached as the words poured out, but I refused to stop now. His voice grew defensive, rising slightly. I was the responsible one. I was trying to set an example. I thought you needed a reality check. And look, you did make it. Maybe it worked. That was the final straw. I stood, my anger boiling over. Don't you dare take credit for my success. I didn't succeed because of you. I succeeded in spite of you. Every night I went hungry. Every hour I worked until my body broke. Every tear I shed. I carried your words in my head like poison. And I turned that poison into fuel. You don't get to claim that. Charles's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted around the room, looking anywhere but at me. The silence stretched between us. I drew a deep breath, my voice calmer now but edged with steel. I don't owe you, Charles. Not money, not forgiveness, not even my time. You made your choice when you cut me off. And I've made mine now. I will never let you treat me that way again. The weight of 9 years finally lifted from my chest. For the first time, I wasn't the little sister he had crushed. I was the woman who had risen without him. Charles sat frozen after my words, his face pale, his lips trembling like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the strength. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, of finally standing tall in front of him, unshaken by his presence. Now that it had come, I felt steady, stronger than I had ever been. He tried one last time, his voice quieter, almost pitiful. Nia, please. I just need a little help. Alone. You have so much now, and I have nothing. We're family. Family. That word again. It sounded hollow coming from him. I let the silence stretch until he finally looked up at me, desperate for mercy. But there was none left to give. No, Charles, I said firmly. You turned your back on me when I needed you the most. You left me to scrape by, to fight alone, to be humiliated in front of everyone we knew. You made sure I understood that I wasn't your family then. So don't come here now when you've fallen, and expect me to forget all of that. He flinched, his pride cracking in front of me. He opened his mouth again, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked to the door, pulled it open, and pointed outside. You need to leave. Right now. For a long moment, he didn't move. His jaw tightened, and I could see the anger simmering beneath his defeated expression. But he knew I meant it. Slowly, he stood and walked toward the door. As he passed me, I caught a glimpse of the man he used to be, the smug brother who had called me trash, who believed he would always stand above me. That man was gone, replaced by someone broken, desperate, and powerless. When he stepped outside, I didn't hesitate. I closed the door behind him, the sound of it slamming echoing through the villa like the final chapter of a book. For the first time, I wasn't closing a door on myself. I was closing it on the person who had once made me believe I was worthless. The house was quiet again, except for the distant crash of waves outside. I poured myself a glass of wine and carried it to the balcony. The sun was sinking into the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. I sank into the chair, letting the ocean breeze wash over me. I thought back to that night years ago when I had left my family's home in tears, humiliated and broken. And now here I was sitting in my own oceanfront villa, not because anyone saved me, but because I saved myself. The pain, the struggle, the endless fight, it had all led to this moment. I didn't feel bitterness anymore. I felt strength. I had risen from the ashes of what he tried to destroy. I had turned trash into triumph. I lifted my glass toward the waves and whispered, the ocean didn't just belong to the rich. It belonged to the survivors too. And I had survived. What about you? If you were in Nia's place, would you have shut the door on Charles, or given him another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear them. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you'll always catch the next one.